Då ska vi fortsätta att läsa. Jag tänker att vi först skriver ner en bön. Se om vi får något svar på den bönen under vår läsning. Så, vi har kommit till cameo 30. As you see him, you will see yourself. Och vi har läst en bit där det handlar om personlighetstester som både Bill och Helen jobbade med. Was there a conflict between this psychological testing and what Bill and Helen were being taught in A Course of Miracles? We can imagine how two very different answers to that question. The first one is yes. Such tests affirm that the personality, along with any mental illness identified, is the person. This runs directly counter to the Course's teaching that the person is in fact a spiritual being, a son of God, who merely believes he is a limited human with a flawed personality. The other answer is no. In administrating such tests, one is merely performing one's professional duty. This really has nothing to do with the Course. One can assess someone's personality and even diagnose mental illness without in any way affirming that the person is not a son of God. Jesus' answer, interestingly, is both of these answers at once. As you see him, you will see yourself. Whether this be through the use of psychological tests or by making judgment in some other way, the effect is still the same. Whenever you have judged anyone, it is impossible for you not to make this judgment on yourself. If you see one of your brothers who happens to be a patient as exhibiting signs of a thought disorder, then you will experience this same disorder in your own perception. For whatever your thought may be about anyone, determines how you will respond and react to yourself and everyone about you. Take heed then, when you are called upon to fulfill your function as teachers, that you teach the truth about God's Son. The only way that you can experience any peace while this unfortunate necessity for interpreting illusions remains is to recognize that you are discussing only illusions, and that this has no real meaning at all. Try to say a prayer for your brother while doing this, and you will call forth and experience a miracle instead. This answer clearly comes down heaviest on the side of the first answer, that there is a conflict between psychological testing and the course. This theme occupies fully 2/3 of the message. The first problem with this testing is that it essentially lays a judgment on the person being tested. It tells him that whatever thought disorder is uncovered by the test is a real part of his identity. On an even more basic level, the testing defines him as a patient, when, more accurately, he is one of your brothers who happens to be a patient, emphasis added. In short, it teaches that this person, that he is not God's son. However important the effects are on the patient, though, Jesus' message focuses mainly on the effects on the psychologist administrating the test, in this case, Bill or Helen. These effects are based on a principle Jesus quotes here from the text. As you see him, you will see yourself. We can think of this as a kind of reverse projection. With projection, our self-perception shines out and determines our perception of another. But here, our perception of the other shines back on us and determines our self-perception. This principle becomes the basis of lesson 134 in the workbook, in which any sin we condemn someone else for, we will then condemn ourselves for. For example, if we judge someone for being disorganized, we will then unconsciously search for our own areas of disorganization and judge ourselves just as merciless. Here, the principle works with equal specificity. Jesus tells Helen and Bill that if they diagnose someone having a thought disorder, you will experience the same disorder in your own perception. This may sound strange until one remembers that the generations of psychology students have sat in abnormal psych classes feeling as if themselves are suffering from each new disorder as it comes up in class. Jag stannar där. Jag har läst både psykologi och psykiatri och socialpsykologi under många år. Gud vad sjuk man blir. Antingen så ser jag diagnoserna hos mig själv, eller också ser jag det i min omgivning. Och det är en väldigt verklig upplevelse inom citattecken såklart. Men att det är lite komiskt att det är på det här sättet. Mycket förlåtelsearbete. Jag tänker det blir verkligen en möjlighet till mycket förlåtelsearbete. Att det är egentligen det Jesus säger i den här passagen. Att överallt, vart jag än är, det spelar ingen roll om jag nu gör psykologiska tester eller jobbar som undersköterska eller står på ICA eller omorganiserar Luftfartsverket eller vad du gör för någonting, så är mitt jobb att se på hur jag dömer ihop med egot och överlämna det till heliga ande så det får göras ogjort. Att det är bara det det handlar om. Det går ju som inte att trycka undan eller försöka undvika Det är inte det det handlar om. Har du nått så här långt? Nej, då fortsätter jag. So the way Helen and Bill see this patient will boomerang back and infect their self-perception. But it won't stop there. Jesus tells them it will also infect how you will respond and react to everyone about you. The ripples from this one judgment will simply keep going, coloring everyone that shattering piece. This certainly sounds as if Bill and Helen should become, in a sense, consensus objectors who, because their spiritual convictions refuse to shoot their fellow man with psychological tests. That, however, is not the message. By labeling such testing an unfortunate necessity, Jesus clearly acknowledging the need to do it. What he is asking is that Helen and Bill continue to go through the motions of carrying out the tests they do, so with overriding consciousness that they are discussing only illusions. And that is that this has no real meaning at all. They need to remember that the tests measure only patterns in the mist. This is clearly not meant to be a half-hearted awareness in theory, tucked somewhere in the back of their minds. Rather, it is meant to be a highly intentional thought held foremost in mind, a thought so powerful that it can actually determine emotional effects of the testing. Ideally, they will even go one step further and say a silent prayer for this brother who is so at risk of being taught falsehood about his identity. By doing so, they will call forth a miracle for him, rather than feeling judged and labeled by shrinks in lab coats. He will feel blessed by angels. And the miracle will not stop there. For the principle that as you see him, you will see yourself does not just work negatively, it works positively as well. Notice how the last sentence says, call forth and experience. By calling forth a miracle for another, Helen and Bill will experience a miracle for themselves. Ja, jag tänker på mitt jobb. Jag jobbar också med patienter och hur svårt det är för mig att tro på att helig ande kan komma igenom i det jobbet. Jag tror liksom att helig ande kan bara komma igenom om jag sitter och läser en kurs i Mirakler tillsammans med andra eller skriver om kursen eller att det inte går. Men det gör ju det. Jag blir ju överbevisad varenda jobbpass. Och min träning är precis densamma som Helen och Bills. Att se på det dömande jag gör om patienter och kollegor med heliga ande och sen följa vägledningen som kan vara att be en bön för min broder. Det har absolut hänt. Men definitivt förlåtelse. Hela passen är bara förlåtelsepass. Och patienterna säger väldigt ofta, ni är änglar, vi är ju vitklädda dessutom. Vitklädda, men ni är änglar, det är änglar som jobbar här. Och man ser ju miraklerna spela ut sig och erfar dem själv också. Har du något som du vill dela här?
Nej, jag sitter och tänker på... Alltså jag är ju pensionist numera och alltså det är ju mycket som kommer upp, massor som kommer upp sen yrkesverksamma livet så att säga. Men som jag skrev i morse, jag kom jättelångt med förlåtelsen. Så att det är bara att förlåta. För jag ser ju att jag själv har... Jag har också jobbat inom sjukvård. Jag har ju gjort så mycket i mitt liv. Jag är så gammal så jag har gjort väldigt... Men jag ser ju hur jag har jobbat i illusion. Fast jag ser också att jag har haft en aning hela tiden. Sedan länge tillbaka. Det är någonting som ligger långt bak. En förnimmelse av att det är en illusion. Att det verkligen är en illusion. Jag kan inte säga mer, för när jag är ju här bland träden och det är ju också en illusion. Så att, ja. Jag ser Miracle och så ser jag inte. Och så ser jag det och så ser jag det inte. Ja, där är jag. Tack.
Tack för det, Lena. Då har vi cameo 31. Jag tror att det här är den sista. Ska se om det är någon till cameo. Jo, det är den näst sista. The Priestess. Lesson 109 in the workbook, I Rest in God, contains a clear reference to an apparent past life vision Helen had in the summer of 1965, following her agreement to join Bill in another way and preceding the dictation of the course, which would commence some months later. The vision was of Helen as a priestess in the distant past, and it turned out to be remarkably persistent for her future. Present, nej det är inte persistent, present for the future. Ska vi se vad det kan betyda då. Ja. Jag vet inte vad det betyder. Jag tänker mig att det har att göra med att det förutsa hennes framtid. Jag har ju läst de här tidigare. Och de finns också med i Absence of Felicity, Kenneth Wapnicks bok om Helen. Och som jag minns det så förutspådde de här hennes kapacitet för att ta ner kursen, att vara en scribe. Men också att hon har valt fel tidigare. Och att den här gången så kunde hon välja sanningen istället för illusion. This vision echoed in lesson 109 was actually the third inner vision she had that summer that depicted her as an ancient priestess. In her very first inner vision, she saw some sort of priestess who was heavily draped and kneeling with bowed head, heavy chains twisted around her wrists and ankles. This vision would recur almost daily, and as it did, the chains began to drop away and she began to raise her head. Very slowly, she finally stood up with only a short, unconnected length of chain still tied to her left wrist. The priestess then raised her eyes to look at Helen, and Helen, after at first looking away in fear, eventually returned her gaze, only to discover that the eyes of the priestess were full of innocence and saw absolutely nothing in Helen that warranted condemnation. Then Helen says, I was suddenly swept away by a sense of joy, so intense I could hardly breathe. Aloud I asked, does this mean I can have my function back? The answer, silent but perfectly clear, was, of course. I would not have believed it was possible to experience such happiness as that answer called forth in me. And for a little while, I kept repeating, how wonderful. Oh, how wonderful. This image of the priestess seems to be a vivid symbol for what Jesus would soon call the soul, a divine element in our nature that retains its heavenly purity, yet feels shackled by our commitment to separation. Once the course dictation began, Jesus used a similar image in relation to Bill. Bill had made a Freudian slip, and Jesus had said this slip was an expression of a soul gaining enough strength to request freedom from prison. It would ultimately demand it. So here we have the same basic concept applied to both Helen and Bill, which naturally raises the question of whether this concept is true for us as well. Is there, in other words, a pure soul in each of us that has been imprisoned, yet is now rising to freedom? The second priestess vision could not have been more opposite. In this one, Helen was the high priestess of an ancient society, only now she was an evil priestess. Her religion was power and enslavement. In this life, Bill was the leader of a slave revolt who had managed to steal the large center ruby from the priestess crown. It was not an ordinary ruby. It gave its wearer magical powers. He had, however, been caught, and Helen was about to execute him by thrusting a spear between his eyes. However, at the last second, she threw down the spear, signifying that Bill would live and she would die. The final scene was of her walking into exile in the scorching desert, where death awaited her, furious with herself for dying for a rebellious slave who was nothing but a common thief. Then comes the third priestess vision, the one that is echoed in lesson 109. The next scene in order of appearance seemed to be so ancient that it appeared as if it was taking place at the very beginning of time. It was a priestess again, but this time of a very different kind. This priestess was, in fact, much like the one with the innocent eyes I had watched emerging from heavy chains into freedom. She was hidden from the world in a small white marble temple set in a broad and very green valley. I was not sure that her body was entirely solid. Actually, what was seen was little more than an outline of a small, slender woman dressed in white, who never came further into the world than the doorway of the little room which contained a plain wooden altar. A small flame burned on it, sending up a steady column of white smoke. The priestess stayed close to the altar, sitting on a low wooden stool and praying with closed eyes for those who came to her for help. Sometimes I saw only the valley outside the temple. At times, there seemed to be no one there, but at other times there was a huge column of people marching together very joyously. The column seemed to extend endlessly in both directions, and I could somehow feel the deep sense of freedom and unity each individual was experiencing as he marched ahead to certain victory. I was not sure what the exact role of the priestess was in helping them all, but I was somehow convinced that her prayers made a vital contribution. I was also sure that people came to her for help from all over. Some, in fact, from very far away. They did not, however, speak to her directly. They knelt on the ledge that ran around a low wall, which separated the inner and the outer parts of the temple, and stated their needs to a man who seemed to be serving as a sort of intermediary between the priestess and the world. He remained in a large enclosed space that separated the priestess from those who came for help. The man conveyed their needs to her. I did not see the man's face for some time, and it took me even longer to recognize him as Bill. He played a crucial role in enabling the priestess to fulfill her function. When people told him what they needed, he went to the door of her room and merely told her that there had been a request for help. He said only that a brother had come for healing and then asked for help on behalf of the brother. The priestess never asked for anyone's name nor for the details of his request. She prayed for everyone in the same way, sitting very quietly beside the flame on the altar. It never occurred to her that help would not be granted. She never really left God's side, and she remained peacefully certain of his presence there in the room with her. I was sure she was myself, and yet I was not sure. What was certain was that I watched her with great love. This image of Helen as a priestess, though it came from visions that preceded the course, was so significant that it cropped up repeatedly once the course dictation began. For instance, near the end of what is now chapter 1, we find it in the notes. We find in the notes these comments from Helen, which clarify the request Bill made to the priestess and the prayer process the prayer process she then went through. Priestess, a brother has knelt on your shrine. Heal him through me. I have an idea that the shrine merely referred to the altar within which the priestess served. I imagine that the communication was direct and the brother always nameless. I think the priestess responded automatically by praying directly to God, standing with upraised arms to draw down a blessing on her brother who knelt outside. Her response was completely automatic and impersonal. Impersonal means that her response was not based on anything special or unique about the recipient. She never even thought of checking the outcome because there was no doubt. I imagine there is still no doubt, really, except that the priestess can no longer ask alone. It was originally sister, not priestess. In addition to this, there are a few places in Helen's early notes where Jesus refers to the priestess. One describes her function. The role of the priestess was once to experience revelations and work miracles. The purpose was to bring those not yet available for direct revelations into proper focus for them. Heightened perception was always the essential priestess attribute. The priestess, in other words, was meant to have experiences of oneness with God, revelations, which would leave her mind in a state of heightened perception. She would then extend that heightened perception to others in the form of miracles. And this would ready them for what had so far been out of their reach, their own experiences of oneness with God. Another reference to the priestess in what is now chapter 4 praises Helen for being both wise and devoted, and claiming your scribal function and working so late. This seems to refer to Helen receiving guidance about a woman's unconscious dynamics in relation to her husband. Jesus implies that by receiving this message, Helen was being a devoted priestess. He then later says, I need devoted teachers as much as I need devoted priestesses. They heal the mind, and that is always my own aim. This theme of the priestess, therefore, runs through both Helen's early visions and her early dictation. In essence, it signifies a role, the role of mediator between the spiritual dimension and the world. The priestess is in direct contact with the spiritual dimension. She never really left God's side. She's able to experience revelations. And because of her contact with that dimension, its blessings can flow through her to others. Her prayers can make a vital contribution to those who seek her help. Her eyes can convey to them the innocence they didn't realize was within. Her messages can heal the mind. Her miracles can open the door to revelation. According to her visions, this is a role that Helen had once completely embodied. Yet that was in the distant past. This is clear in the first vision, in which the priestess was kneeling near a fire that appeared to be associated with an ancient religious rite. It is especially clear in the third vision, which seemed to depict a scene so ancient that it appeared as if it was taking place at the beginning, the very beginning of time, since that primeval time she had clearly fallen away from this high function. We see this most starkly in the second vision, in which still in ancient times, Helen was a priestess who used her paranormal powers not to heal and bless, but to dominate and enslave. This brings us to her life as Helen, where for her first 56 years, her identity as the ancient priestess was entirely submerged. This identity, though, was not merely a past role. It reminded a living presence within her. It remained a living presence within her. It was, in a sense, her soul identity, which through current bound and shackle was waiting for the opportunity to rise up and resume its ancient function. And so, when Bill declared there must be another way, and Helen agreed to join in it, the chains began to fall away and the priestess began to stir to life. The form her ministry would take in this lifetime would be very different than the past, of course. Rather than conducting religious rites or sending out prayers from inside a marble temple, Helen would be a conduit for the blessings of the spiritual dimension through the messages she took down. This was how she would pass on to others the heightened perception that she had the gift of accessing within herself. In Helen's function as a scribe of A Course in Miracles, therefore, the priestess emerged from the past to resume her ancient role. In fact, the specific image of the priestess in the temple is almost uncannily mirrored in Helen's eventual role as a scribe of the Course. Just as the priestess communed with God and then sent out the blessings from that in the form of prayers, so Helen communed with Jesus and sent out the blessings from that in the form of spiritual teachings, just as Bill played a crucial role in enabling the priestess to fulfill her function. So he did the same with Helen. Only now, instead of relaying messages from the people, Bill relayed messages to the people from Helen through his typewriter. In both cases, though, his support was what completed the circuit, allowing this solitary figure to reach the people for whom her blessings were intended. And just as the priestess' prayers attracted a huge column of people marching together very joyously, so Helen's messages have touched countless lives through A Course of Miracles and the works inspired and influenced by it. Now we can grasp the true significance of what happened at the end of her first vision, where she asked, "Does this mean I can have my function back?" And then heard a silent but perfectly clear answer, "Of course." That is exactly what happened. The ancient priestess did get her function back, and millions have been blessed thereby. Yet, how could any of that have been known when Helen first saw her vision of the priestess in the temple, months before she heard the words, "This is a course of miracles, please take notes"? How could she know that she was seeing a vision not only of her past, but also of her future? Given the significance of the image of the priestess, it is not surprising that we find echoes of it in the course. The first is in the text section titled "The Reflection of Holiness." This section presents an image of a temple where holiness waits quietly for the return of them that love it. It then says, "You can become a spotless mirror in which the holiness of your Creator shines forth from you to all around you." And when you do this, it says, others will come to you for the healing of their problems through the image of holiness that shines in your mind. They bring their different problems to its healing light, but all their problems are met only with healing there. The response of holiness to any form of error is always the same. Its one response is healing without any regard for what is brought to it. We can readily see here echoes of the holy priestess in her temple, waiting for those who will come to it, serving as a pure conduit for the light of God, and responding to everyone's problems with the exact same gift of healing without regard for any of the individuals, the individual details. As we mentioned at the beginning of this cameo, though the clearest reference to Helen's priestess vision is found in workbook lesson 109, I rest in God. You rest within the peace of God today and call upon your brothers from your rest to draw them to their rest along with you. You will be faithful to your trust today, forgetting no one, bringing everyone into the boundless circle of your peace, the holy sanctuary where you rest. Open the temple doors and let them come from far across the world and near as well. Your distant brothers and your closest friends, bid them all enter here and rest with you. You rest today within the peace of God, quiet and unafraid. Each brother comes to take his rest and offer it to you. We rest together here, for thus our rest is made complete. And what we give today, we have received already. The parallels with Helen's vision are unmistakable. We have here a temple occupied by someone who is sunk deep in communion with God. And to this temple comes a multitude of others, some from very far, to partake in the spiritual blessings that radiate from this person. The difference, of course, is that here the pattern is applied to us. The above passage is part of this lesson's meditation instructions, given that it clearly alludes to the vision of the priestess. It implies that when we meditate, we should see ourselves as serving the same role that the priestess did. We typically think of meditation as a solitary activity. But the idea here is that just as the priestess prayed to send out healing to the huge column, that came to her temple, so we can meditate. We should consciously invite everyone into our temple to draw them in to the boundless circle of our peace. Much the same could be said of the earlier passage from the reflection of holiness. There, we are also asked to be what the priestess was, a channel of healing, who is brought a variety of different problems by different people, but who offers all of them the exact same response, healing. The end of the story, therefore, is not that Helen repeated her ancient role as a priestess, and we are the beneficiaries of that. As uplifting as that is, the end of the story is that we, as Helen's spiritual heirs, are called to repeat the role of the priestess ourselves. We are meant to have our own temple and cultivate there our own connection with God. And then, like Helen, we are meant to pass on the priceless blessings of that connection to others. Perhaps then we should see the following passage about extending God's peace, which is clearly reminiscent of the priestess, as describing our own life purpose. And you will carry its message of love and safety and freedom, and safety and freedom to everyone who draws night onto your temple, where healing waits for him. Jag drar över tiden lite grann. Jag är helt fascinerad. Min bön är att jag vill vara lycklig och i frid, och så får jag svaret först om hur mitt arbete på sjukhuset bara är förlåtelse, och sen jag känner ju att min funktion är precis som det beskrivs här. Jag upplever att det är precis det här vi gör på våra möten. Det är exakt det här vi gör på våra möten. Vi mediterar tillsammans, vi sitter i vår kommunion med Gud, och vi lyssnar till de problem som kommer upp, och vi möter det med helande på olika sätt. Så jag fick ju verkligen svaret om vad det är som gör mig lycklig och i frid. Ja. Hur var det för dig?
Jo, jag fick ju också svar. Jag bad om att få mina tankar ersatta med Guds tankar. Eller dissolve my thoughts with yours, dear God, skrev jag. Och så skrev jag att min önskan är frid. Och ja, det var precis vad jag fick. Tack, tack. Det var, alltså, alla de här snurriga tankarna om hur ska det gå, hur ska det bli, så. Alltså de bara försvinner, och jag kan se att det är ingenting.
Mm.
Hur mycket jag än håller på och gräver i det och ojar mig och aj, och upp och ner. Nej, det är ingenting. Och så när jag får höra Guds tankar. Ja. Ja, det är häftigt.
Det är det verkligen.
Mm.
Tusen tack. Då blir sista gången blir nästa gång. Ska se hur det ser ut. Jag tror att jag kan. Ja, den 19, dagen före midsommar. Det är sista
Ja,
tillfället.
det blir
Vi,
bra.
det blir det. Vi ses.
Det gör vi. Tack.
Hej hej.
Hej.